Hello, Gemini. I am Poetic Heretic, and this is your October 2019 astrology forecast. I will be going over what I consider to be the most important astrological developments for your sign of Gemini in October 2019. Now, this applies whether you're a Gemini sun, rising, or moon. This will all be relevant for you. I have a list here. I have some notes, and in them a list of what I consider to be the most important astrological developments for you that I'll be referring to throughout this. And I'd rather give you a few things that are really important that you'll be able to remember than give you seemingly endless details on a bunch of things and then you could barely remember any of it. So even though I may give a lot of details about the few things, ultimately it boils down to a few simple things. And I think you'll see that as we go through, especially this month, because we have so many planets sort of in the same area of the zodiac. And so there's going to be a recurring theme in this that you'll pick up on very quickly as we go. So this month, it should be especially easy to remember what the main themes are for you. So, to begin here, in order to understand the astrological developments of October, we first have to go back to the end of September, specifically September 28th, where we had the new moon in Libra at 2:27 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, this took place in your fifth house, and it was opposite Chiron. So, the new moon is where a new cycle begins. That's the new lunar cycle, and it lasts for 28 days until the next new moon. So, the current lunar cycle is one that, if you're watching this, say on October 1st, just began a couple of days ago for you. Well, for everyone, but it's going to be different how it manifests for everyone and for each sign. So this began September 28th. It will carry through for the majority of October until specifically October 27th, when we have the next new moon, which we will talk about later. So this new moon took place in your fifth house of love and fun and romance and sex and gambling, risk-taking, those sorts of things. So new beginnings in those areas of life. And that will carry through again through this next lunar cycle until October 27th. So you can expect all of that fifth house activity to be a big theme for you this month. Again, love, fun, romance, sex, gambling, or risk-taking, all of that stuff. Anything that is having to do a lot with like fun and self-expression and sort of the boldness of life. Now, what's interesting about this new moon is also that it was opposite Chiron, wounded healer Chiron. So even though the fifth house is all about fun, there is likely an element of the healing of wounds connected to this new moon and this whole lunar cycle that's lasting for the majority of October. The healing of wounds in yourself or others, or just unhealed wounds, period, whether they get healed or not, maybe up to sort of an individual basis, but just know that that idea of the healing of wounds is very much connected to this current lunar cycle that we are in. And that, by the way, affects all signs, because it doesn't matter what house it's occurring in for you. The new moon is opposite Chiron, or the new moon on September 28th was opposite Chiron. Regardless, it's opposite Chiron, period. So with all of that said, let's get into some dates now, actually in October. First, we have on October 3rd, Mercury moving from Libra to Scorpio at 4:14 a.m. Eastern Time. And that is from your 5th to your 6th house. So for the first 2 days and a little bit into the third day of October, you will have Mercury continually transiting your 5th house, where it has been for a number of weeks now. Mercury in the 5th house is all about creative thinking and thinking a lot about how to have fun and be self-expressive and taking risks and things of that nature. It's extremely creative energy for Mercury, which is all about the mind and communication as well. Now, that's just the first 2 days. On October 3rd, when Mercury moves into your 6th house, now your thoughts are much more about your work and your day-to-day activities and your schedule and your health. Mercury in the 6th house has more precision to its thinking, has a more analytical try to say that correctly, nature. Mercury in the 6th house looks at things certainly in a more cautious, but especially a more practical, sort of grounded way as compared to the 5th house. And again, issues like your work and your health are likely to be involved in a very mental sense, thinking a lot, or a lot of mental activity, perhaps also communication surrounding your work and or your health. Now, on October 4th, Mars moves from Virgo to Libra at 12:21 a.m. Eastern Time. So the very, very early hours of October 4th, Mars moves from your 4th to your 5th house. So first 3 days of October, Mars in your 4th house, where it has been for some time now. Mars in the 4th is very like self-protective and acts with caution. Mars in the 4th will not act unless it is sure of things. Mars in the 4th has lots of energy for taking care of things around the home and family. Mars in the 4th can see like emotional issues rise to the surface and can have you feeling almost restless or perhaps extra defensive at times, because the 4th house is all about safety and security as well. And so Mars, the warrior, like what happens, think about it this way, Mars is the warrior. What happens when the warrior gets into a position that's all about defense or all about safety and security? It's going to get very defensive. Its attack instincts are going to sort of default, in this case, to defense, if that makes sense. So that's the first 3 days of October. It's no news for you because Mars has been in your 4th house for I believe, at least, I'd have to look it up, but well over a month at this point. So it's nothing really new. But on October 4th, Mars moves into your 5th house. And now suddenly you have much more energy for self-expression, and you're going to prioritize things like fun and hobbies, risk-taking / gambling, maybe sports. You're going to prioritize love and romance, things of this nature. So the risk with Mars in the 5th, though, is while you may have that abundance of physical energy and, be ready to have fun and all that stuff, you might not quite have the discipline to control it. You might be a little out of control or be tempted to be out of control, prioritizing like Mars, wherever Mars is what we prioritize. And Mars in the 5th house is all about having fun and whatnot. So might be like a desire to have so much fun or prioritizing fun but without possibly, if you're not careful, without enough self-discipline to keep things stable. So it can be a bit of a wild placement, but you know, if you can keep it under control, then it can be great. And again, that's October 4th through the rest of October. Okay, let's see. On October 8th, Venus goes from Libra to Scorpio at 1:05 p.m. Eastern Time. That is from your 5th to your 6th house. So for the first week and into half the day, October 8th, Venus is in your very how do I put it? Very ready to indulge in all kinds of sensual pleasures and satisfaction, especially sensual satisfaction. And Venus, the 5th, just basically loves to have fun. That's probably the simplest and clearest way that I can say it. It's a great time for, or at the very least, it's a very conducive time for romance, for new romances developing, and is especially applicable or especially fitting for one to allow themselves to be pursued, like for you, Gemini, to allow yourself to be pursued, as opposed to you're trying to pursue another person, because this is Venus, the feminine planet, in the 5th house. So yeah, it's a it's a great time for fun and new romance, and your ability to flirt and stuff like that is likely to be heightened, if not off the charts. So it's a delightful placement. So I hope you have a lot of fun with that. However, that is, of course, just the first week. On October 8th, Venus moves into your 6th house for the rest of October. Venus in the 6th now is all about beautifying your work environment, trying to associate pleasure with work, whether that seems realistic for you or not. There may be the risk in some cases of perhaps laziness, because you'll want to expect to get pleasure out of work or whatever. So that could be a potential issue. But the 6th house, of course, also talks about things like your schedule and your day-to-day activities. It may be the love of routine, or having fun, or taking pleasure from getting into a routine, or just taking pleasure from an already existing routine, that sort of thing. Venus in traditional astrology is said to be the lesser benefic. The greater benefic is Jupiter. And Venus blesses everything that it touches. It brings good fortune and good results all around to everything it touches. So this should be a really great time as Venus moves into your 6th house, for your work, for your health, for your schedule and day-to-day activities, these sorts of things. So excellent indeed. And again, that's October 8th that Venus moves into your 6th house through the rest of the month. Now, on October 11th, Mercury enters its retrograde shadow in Scorpio and in your 6th house. So this is not Mercury going retrograde yet. This is Mercury entering the area where it will retrograde back through when it does go retrograde. So let me explain that a bit further. Mercury retrograde is like a pendulum. It's just sort of moving along here in the sky, Mercury, and then it enters its shadow. Pendulum swings this way, then it goes retrograde, pendulum swings this way, and then it goes direct, pendulum swings this way. So it's this pendulum area, not the area back here, but the pendulum area that once Mercury enters into is considered its retrograde shadow. So it enters its retrograde shadow before going retrograde, then it goes retrograde, then it enters its retrograde shadow again. So what does this mean? basically it means on October 11th, it's going to start to feel like Mercury is retrograde already. It's going to start to feel that way. And then it officially goes retrograde on the 31st, Halloween. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Now, Mercury retrograde, a lot can be said about that. I'm not going to go on a big diatribe about that right now, but there are people who think it's like the end of the world. There are people who think it's not that big of a deal at all. I tend to take a middle of the road approach, and I basically say it should definitely be honored, but it's also not the end of the world. Like, it should be taken into strong consideration. You know, they say you don't want to start new things during a Mercury retrograde if you can help it. You want to avoid doing very technical things, avoid things like surgery if possible. Of course, sometimes you can't avoid stuff like that, and do what you have to do. But if you can't avoid it, then avoid it, delay it until Mercury is no longer retrograde. But I think I lost my train of thought there. Speaking of Mercury retrograde, geez, that's something that can happen during a Mercury retrograde, is you lose your train of thought. But I don't know. Let's just try to continue here. Once it, of course, goes direct again, then you don't have to worry about those things. Communication mishaps can be a risk during a Mercury retrograde. Technological issues, mechanical breakdowns can be issues during Mercury retrogrades. So yeah, it's best not to start new things during them. Perhaps if you're very careful, then that won't be an issue. I guess even now I wouldn't consider that an absolute rule. It's just that in my own experience, things just work better when you honor the activity, the energetic activity of the universe, rather than think that you can defy it in some way. Things just go better when you honor it, at least whenever possible. So that's my advice. So this happens in your, again, 6th house of health, work, and day-to-day activities. So what this means in a very generalized and simplified sense is that as Mercury enters its shadow, its retrograde shadow, the mental activity, because that's what Mercury is, mental activity, will begin to become intensified around that area of life, around your work and your health and your schedule and your day-to-day activities. So just be aware of that. Also, because it is going to go retrograde, Mercury is going to stay for an extra long time in your 6th house in the weeks and months to come, essentially. And we'll look at that more as we get into November. But yeah, just know that this is going to be an extended stay that Mercury will have in your 6th house, and thus, therefore, your mind will be focused upon your work and day-to-day activities and health and all that far more. So, moving on. The full moon in Aries takes place on October 13th at 5:07 p.m. in your 11th house. So, a couple of things here. First of all, remember we mentioned earlier the new moon was in your 5th house of love and fun and romance and sex. So all of that energy is going to culminate now at the time of the full moon. The full moon is when things come to a head and things really happen. What things are going to happen, you ask? Things surrounding that 5th house activity. Love, fun, gambling, risk-taking, self-expression, and all of these things, romance and sex, that too, all of these things. So that will happen again October 13th at 5:07 p.m. Eastern time. Now, it's also going to involve your 11th house, because The fifth house energy, it draws from the new moon, but the full moon itself is in your 11th house. So it's also going to involve things like community, social networking, whether that's digital or material, physical, I guess. It's going to involve things like friends. It's going to involve things like let's all work together, the group, the group consciousness, the sort of group mind, perhaps even. 11th house is like the house of friends, as opposed to the 12th house, the house of enemies. So, that sort of thing. It's like, oh, friends and the group and all of that is going to be emphasized strongly at the time of the full moon on October 13th, that night, Friday the 13th. Or actually, I apologize. I'm thinking of September. It's September. That is Friday the 13th. It's September as I'm filming this, so I was momentarily confused. But anyway, see, Mercury's not even in its retrograde shadow, and it's already beginning to affect people, or at least it's beginning to affect me, or at least I can blame it on that and hope that that's the case. All right, so anyway, that's the full moon in Aries. Now, on October 23rd, the sun enters Scorpio, as it does every year at this time of year. And this year it happens at specifically 1:19 p.m. Eastern Time. So this is the sun moving from your 5th to your 6th house. I'm sure you're noticing this theme by now in this forecast of going from the 5th house to the 6th house. Well, this is just even more of that. The sun, the sun is our life force. It can be our ego. It's our sense of self. It's the bringer of life. It brings awareness to whatever it touches and life and vitality to whatever it touches. So up until October 23rd, it's in your 5th house, again, of love, fun, romance, sex, gambling, risk-taking, etc., bringing lots of life to that area of your life. And then on October 23rd at 1:19 p.m., there's a shift in the energy as it moves into your 6th house, again, of work and health and day-to-day activities and your schedule. And now that whole area of your life is going to be that much more lit up, that much more emphasized, that much more energized for the rest of the month. And of course, for the first approximately 2/3 of November. But we'll get to that next month. Now, on October 27th, we have the new moon in Scorpio. So the previous lunar cycle completes. And now, October 27th, the new lunar cycle begins with the new moon in your 6th house at 11:38 p.m. Eastern Time. And this new moon is also opposite Uranus, so some interesting things to unpack here. First of all, the new moon being in your 6th house, what does that mean? That means new beginnings surrounding 6th house activities. Yet again, your work, your health, your day-to-day activities, your schedule, that sort of thing. New beginnings in that area of life, and that will carry through for the majority of November as well, and indeed for the rest of October, starting the night of October 27th. However, this new moon is a rather special new moon. I mean, this isn't exactly extremely uncommon, but it's definitely not common either. And it's that this new moon is opposite Uranus, or I should say it's not extremely uncommon for a new moon to be opposite or powerfully aspecting a powerful outer planet. But for it to be, I guess, if you were to say Uranus specifically, that is getting to be something more rare. So anyway, what does this mean for you? Uranus is the planet of the sudden, the shocking, unexpected developments in life, the sudden insights or revelations, the things that are weird and don't make sense, or maybe they don't make sense at first, but they'll make sense at some other point, but right now everything seems crazy. Uranus is the bolt of lightning, the sudden new beginning. And so I think with this new moon being opposite Uranus, and this will apply to everyone, by the way, not just you, Gemini, but everyone. This new moon will come in like a bolt of lightning for everyone. It'll be a sudden new beginning, full of new energy. And in fact, it may even be, with the nature of Uranus, a new beginning that breaks down something that has been stagnant for a while and has not been working. And again, that would apply to everyone. So, a very exciting new moon. It's almost like a new moon on steroids. It's a new moon with some power and oomph to it. So, very exciting times. And again, that's October 27th, 11:38 p.m. Eastern Time. And it's in your 6th house of health, work, day-to-day activities in your schedule. Now, on October 30th, there is a Mercury-Venus conjunction in Scorpio at 6:04 p.m., and that is your 6th house. So, Mercury-Venus conjunction. When these two get together, the planet of the mind, Mercury, and the planet of love, Venus, it's like a love of finding harmony with others and working together and cooperation and diplomacy, and let's talk this out and let's figure this out and let's come to an understanding, and a love of finding mutual ground on which to stand, that sort of thing. Like, let's work together. It can also be a love of communication. And also, I guess, well, I might as well just go out on a limb here and say, if there's anyone watching here who loves to sing, since Mercury is going to talk about the voice and Venus is going to talk about great beauty, it's a great day for singing. I know that's kind of random, but that just came to me. I think I said the same thing to Aries, actually, now that I think about it. But anyway, just in case anyone out there is interested in that. But for everyone, for all Gemini people, this takes place in your 6th house. So yet again, the 6th house. So in this case, I would say it's likely about, how can we best work with our coworkers? How can we best work together at work with one another and cooperate and find harmony with each other, that sort of thing. It may even be like, see, when you have a conjunction, it's like usually that exact day. Sometimes it could be up to a day or two before or after, but usually it's that exact day. Like, something happens, conjunctions, that's when things happen. And that's why I'm including relevant conjunctions in these astrology videos. But of course, in this month of October, in this month of October, there's really only one conjunction, and that is this Mercury-Venus conjunction, although technically a new moon is a conjunction, but that's, we just call that a new moon. Anyway, so a conjunction is when things happen. So I would say expect on the 30th for some kind of cooperative, communicative venture, particularly surrounding your work and or health, to take place. Like, something new may begin that day, in fact, that involves those subjects. So overall, it's a very positive thing, though. Like I said earlier, Venus blesses anything it touches. With Venus, it's almost always good. Not quite always, because there can be the risk of overindulgence, stuff like that. But the vast, vast majority of the time, Venus is very easy, delightful energy to work with. Now, the final thing that we have here for you, Gemini, in October is, as I alluded to earlier, the Mercury retrograde officially begins October 31st, Halloween day, at 11:41 a.m. and in your 6th house. So it's going to be an interesting Halloween. There's going to be a strange shift of energy, perhaps, on Halloween. Although, like I said, because Mercury's been in its retrograde shadow up until that point, it'll have already felt like Mercury's retrograde, at least to some extent, but I would say you're likely to start feeling it even more on or around Halloween Day, October 31st. And again, that's in your sixth house. Mental activity is going to be intensified around those sixth house matters of your work, your health, your day-to-day activities, and your schedule, those sorts of things. And while, I guess, quote unquote, normally Mercury would not stay in your sixth house or any house for this long, it's going to be in an extended stay in it because of the retrograde. But we'll get into more of that and specifically how that actually plays out next month. But of course, another reason I put normally in quotes is because Mercury goes retrograde multiple times a year, as many of you probably know, since you don't even have to really be into astrology or anything to hear about Mercury retrograde all the time. It's like sometimes it seems like when is Mercury not retrograde or in its shadow or something, but which is maybe another reason to not think that it's the end of the world when it does happen. But at the same time, like I said, it should at least be honored to the best of your ability. At least that's my opinion. You know, you do what you want out there, but that's my opinion. So that is it, Gemini. I hope you have a magnificent October 2019 and happy Halloween. I should start saying that to each sign. And feel free to subscribe to me if you're not already, because I do indeed plan on being back each month from now on with more astrology and tarot related videos, astrology and tarot forecasts, and other videos that have to do with astrology and tarot. So if you enjoyed this, feel free to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. It's been a lot of fun. And again, have a great month and hope to see you next time.